Greetings, y'all. I am challenging myself to tell a story and say yes to something that I might not necessarily be comfortable with. So, here we go. It is sometimes a fun exercise to try to string together the pieces of your life path that may have led you to where you are right now. In my case, I can see leanings in the nomad direction from the time I was very small, walking places by myself in the days where you could do that kind of thing, when I was 5, and the company that my father worked for at the time transferred him to various locations about 4 or 5 times when I was in grade school. So I think those two things definitely contributed to sort of a normalcy about moving around often. In high school, I was part of a backpacking group that went up into the mountains in Montana and Wyoming, and that was my first taste of knowing the freedom of everything I needed was on my back. Later in high school, I would travel with a group of other Americans and Canadians as part of a musical ensemble to Taiwan and Japan. That trip gave me my first experience with flying, and there just happened to be 4 flights in one day to get us to where we were going, and then a lengthy ride on a bullet train. In college, I participated in a program called Eurospring, where we studied in Oxford and then did the typical whirlwind tour of the continent in 3 weeks, I believe, hitting 6 or 7 countries. And on that trip, I was introduced to England and Italy being the places that impacted me the most, and it was uppermost in my mind to find a way to go back to either place to live and or work at some point in the future. Previous to that specific goal, growing up with my INFJness, which I didn't know that had a name at the time, I was a creative person feeling stuck in a culture that didn't know what to do with me. And my dream was, as a very frequent babysitter, to use those skills to escape to a larger metro area from small town Midwestern living and be a nanny for a family. What ended up happening is a friend of mine from that Eurospring experience, I told her about that plan. She ended up becoming a nanny for a family when we graduated from college on the East Coast, and eventually got me a position for another family in the same neighborhood. Once I had attained that goal after graduating from college, I realized that still being under someone else's roof and control didn't meet my requirements. So while I was a nanny, I was looking for teaching jobs because I had graduated with an education degree, and flooding the market with resumes is how we did things back then. I discovered that there was a teacher placement agency about 2 hours away. I wrote for the paperwork to fill out and drove to deliver it to create my presence in their system, and very shortly thereafter received a call from a headmaster of an international school in Italy, in Rome, that used that teacher placement agency when they had vacancies. He was looking for a middle school language arts teacher, which I was qualified for, and wanted to interview me. Yay! However, the family was away for a week and had entrusted me with the baby on my own, and I couldn't leave to go have an interview somewhere. But I knew that the housekeeper was going to be coming on her day, and she agreed to watch the baby so I could go out and have an interview on the deck of this amazing house with the headmaster, who was okay with that, had been able to borrow a car, I believe, from his dad. And we had the interview. On the 4th of July, I got a call from him offering me the job, and that set me on the trajectory to attain the other goal that I had set for myself, living and working abroad, particularly in either England or Italy. Before I left for Rome, I attended a David Bowie concert, Let's Dance, in Hartford, Connecticut, and went to a pre-concert party hosted by a native Italian woman who very graciously provided me with a list of names and phone numbers of people she knew my age that she felt would be amenable to this crazy American, so I might have some points of contact in addition to the people that I worked with at the school. I think it took me a couple weeks of settling in before I had the nerve to pick up the phone and try to contact these people, one of whom I was able to reach, Monica. But first it was her brother who picked up the phone, and eventually we started dating. And that gave me the opportunity to spend nearly every weekend with his extended family on the ancestral farmstead and learn more Italian than I might have in any other situation, and usually came back to work after the weekend with another phrase having found its slot in my head about, oh, that's what that means. Of course, that experience was amazing, and having attained that goal that I set for myself was incredible, but I also noticed a certain element of, is that all there is? Is this it? And also the phenomenon of wherever you go, there you are. At the ripe old age of 23 or 24, realizing that it didn't really matter where you went, the relationships that I found myself in were consistently unsatisfactory ones. By this time, I had taken the Myers-Briggs test in college and knew that my category was an INFJ. And in that time frame, the characteristics and the anecdotal stories about that particular section of their inventory didn't give me as much information as I would later stumble upon in YouTube University. Fast forward through 40 years of lots of INFJ searching and needing to understand why, and finding some answers and not finding many others, I stumbled upon new generations of lenses through which to look, and different interpretations and depths of explanations that made so much more sense to me about why I experienced relationships the way that I did. It took being a nomad to have the consistent time to dedicate to learning this information, the supporting physical environment that Mama Nature provides if you allow her to while you're out here, that eventually allowed me to arrive at some new places in my personal growth and my understanding of that personal growth that was exponentially head and shoulders above any other body of work that I had had immense joy in stumbling upon, but not quite the same end result with. Before I got out on the road, I bumped into some material about attachment injury, and depending on the family of origin you grew up with, maybe there was no violence or emotional abuse, but not very much communication, then that type of attachment injury produces characteristics and behavior that can make us very accommodating as a coping mechanism that works well for us when we need that food, clothing, and shelter as a young person. But as we get older and become adults, that coping mechanism does not serve us at all. What I discovered about the research into what being an INFJ meant was that we have a tendency, because we are so good at recognizing what's going on with other people in terms of their emotions and psychological happenings, and we want to help anybody fix those kinds of things, or at least delve into them to some degree, make improvements in their lives, that we tend to scoop out what is us inside of us and make room for all of that happening for the other person, and basically lose ourselves in that process. I wasn't aware that that was something more than a groomed female thing in this culture. It was definitely part of being an INFJ. Learning that was both alarming but also freeing, to understand that, yes, that's the way my cognitive stack is set up here. But I also have control over which of those cognitive aspects I choose to put forward, and those that I choose to pull back because they may be dominant at a time that doesn't serve me. So with some coaching, I slowly started to learn to recognize when I would start to fall into that very natural habit that I had cultivated, and change things up, choose otherwise. It feels incredibly uncomfortable to do things differently than you always have, and that may break some unspoken rule that you went by in your family of origin. But the freedom that that new way of being gives you is worth all of the effort that you put into it. So now, instead of automatically defaulting to focusing on somebody else and what may or may not be happening for them in their psychological world, and whether or not they're interested in improving that, and instead choose to channel that energy into myself and make myself a better person who is going to be more readily available in different ways, and also better equipped to make vetting choices about potential partners that I had never been privy to before. Another YouTube University phenomenon that I bumped into was information made available because of the prevalence of social media, and making it very clear that in addition to women being damaged by the culture in certain ways, men are as well, which I knew previously, but the extent to which that is true, and where most men are not conditioned, expected to, or know how to function in a relationship the way that we are educated to expect them to, that's just not going to happen. There was a lot more going on than had previously made sense to me. So at the same time, I was learning to not automatically hollow myself out as an INFJ to accommodate others. I was also learning to not analyze others' behavior, even though that's so much fun for an INFJ to do, and to acknowledge and label behavior and create boundaries around what I would or would not do once I recognize that behavior. I joined groups of people who were interested in learning about this phenomenon and applying new skills in their lives as well. And again, having that consistent time available because I'm a nomad, I think that made a huge difference in the pace and rate at which I was able to take on this new information and apply it in such a way that the results were really quite remarkable. You can take on all kinds of theory, and until you're willing to practice, things don't really shift or change. And because I was willing to take on that theory into practice consistently over time, especially during the last year, and really make them part of me, mind, body, and soul, I do feel sometimes like a completely new person. Because again, the lenses through which I'm looking both at myself and the people around me are significantly different and allow me to have significantly different experiences. So as a nomad, I'm looking forward to however many years I'm able to stay out on the road and to experiences and relationships that develop over the next 30 years that mirror back to me those things that I've been learning. I can trace my nomad lineage from my childhood through my early adulthood through to now and see those common threads that have gotten me to where I am right now. And I really cannot wait to see what's next. So I think I've met my self-imposed challenge to tell a story about myself and put myself out there in ways that I don't usually do in front of the camera. And ultimately, it would be my hope to, as a true INFJ, contribute to your journey somehow, but in ways that I don't even need to know about. So wherever you are on your journey, I wish you well, and hopefully you continue to be inspired and find breadcrumbs and Easter eggs along your trail that help you as much as the ones that I've found in mine. Here are some paraphrased quotes I've collected over the last 6 months or so that I thought might be helpful. Inhibiting ourselves as a child to cope with attachment injury is interpreted as shyness. We agreed not to notice the dysfunction in our family and tried to numb out. INFJs can't do that. Extroverted feeling is where boundaries happen. INFJ's second function. Emotional intelligence relies on the privilege of having had permission across the breadth of childhood to be aware of and then express anger with and to our caregivers. You're not in trouble. You can't always say no, but you can place a pause between the request and a response. For a partner who does not communicate with their words, their behavior communicates for them. There is nothing else to figure out.